Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joinedup. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle or MP3 player. Thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a weekly show featuring interviews with fantastic authors sharing their personal stories on how and why they write. There's hints and tips for aspiring writers and great book reviews from top bloggers. Follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast. Right, cue the cheesy theme tune.
Put down your pen and stop your typing. Grab yourself a drink, cause it's Joined Up Writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 92 with New York-based literary fiction writer Julia Kite talking about her debut novel, why she loves writing and how her day job feeds into the worlds she creates. There'll also be another trip to Book Bloggers Corner with one of our regular bloggers, Emma Rose Hollands, reviewing a book that 8 out of 10 of you are sure to love. That's a tenuous cat joke that I doubt anyone outside of the UK will get, but Emma already used the best pun in her review, so you can check that out later. Before that, a quick update from me. Well, behind my original deadline, but slightly ahead of my revised schedule, I've just completed the latest edits of my book, Safe Hands, and tomorrow, yes, tomorrow, it will begin its first tentative step towards submission as I start to send it out to agents. I'll be honest, I am pretty terrified, and a big part of me really wanted to do yet another pass of edits and delay sending it out, but after putting myself through the ringer and venting to one of my writing friends, I've decided to feel the fear and do it anyway. It's the first time I've submitted a novel anywhere other than a couple of big competitions, which are far more anonymous anyway and much easier to compartmentalise. I've subbed plenty of short stories and had some minor successes along the way, but again, there's something about sending a book out into the world, something on and off that I've been working on for years and that could just be dismissed, torn apart, or more likely, just be ignored. So the reason I decided to push ahead with it, other than the gentle push I got from my friend, was that I don't want to be that writer, the one that's always just about to send out their manuscript. Yeah, almost there, just another few tweaks, one more pass, bit more polishing, etc, etc. As far as I'm concerned, I've already spent longer on it than I wanted to, and a great deal of that has been down to self-doubt. But I don't know whether any of you can relate to this or not, but sometimes I find it hard to differentiate between paralysing self-doubt and just a desire to make it as good as you can before you send it out. And I do think it's healthy to have a good level of self-criticism and recognise that writing is rewriting, but I do also worry that if I'm not careful, I'll erode the thing that makes this story, my novel, my voice. Time after time we've had guests on here, including editors and an agent, and they all say that voice is the most important thing they look for the first time they read a manuscript. So yes, I think my book still needs further edits, and I think I may be able to cut further scenes possibly, but I also think the early part of the novel and my protagonist are in good enough shape for someone with a trained eye to know whether I've got something that chimes with them or not. I also need to accept that there's going to be a lot of rejection, a lot of no's before I get my yes, and the quicker I get those no's, the sooner I'll get to my yes. Well, that's how I'm rationalising it anyway, but maybe you think I'm nuts. So if you do, then feel free to let me know, and I'd love to hear how you deal with those types of feelings and how you push through rejection, self-doubt and the submissions process. So let me know by dropping me a line at wayne@waynekellywrites.com. You can tweet at JU Podcast, or you can drop into our Facebook community. Speaking of community, I'd also love to be able to offer more bonus content, more free downloads to all of you, and the easiest way to do that is for you to join the mailing list at joinedupwriting.co.uk. You'll get a free PDF, 10 tips to survive NaNoWriMo, the first draft and beyond, plus more free content in the coming weeks and months, things like extra podcasts and a heads up on some live Q&A sessions that I've got planned. It costs nothing and it takes seconds to do, so head over to the website. Right, on to today's interview with Julia Kite. Julia describes herself as a New Yorker and ex-Londoner who just can't quit writing. She's insatiably curious, eager to learn and passionate about writing craft. Her debut novel, The Hope and Anchor, was published in February 2018 and is available right now everywhere you can buy books. Thanks a million for coming on to Joined Up Writing, Julia. It's great to chat to you all the way in New York City. Afternoon for you and the evening for me, so thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about your debut novel, The Hope and Anchor?
Yes, well, The Hope and Anchor was published by Unbound earlier this year, 2018, and it is my first novel that was many years in the making. It's in many ways a love letter to a specific part of London at a specific part of time that I began writing after I'd left it, and when I came to realize just what really a special place it was. And it focuses on, first and foremost, a missing person, but I don't like to think of it as, as a mystery, as a detective story. It's really the story of what happens to the people left behind when somebody goes missing and how they kind of cope with their traumas and how no matter how much they try to kind of move on with their lives, they find things from their past kind of increasingly pulling them back. So it was all these things I wanted to pretty much explore in the context of this one little part of London around the Harrow Road and the Grand Union Canal in West London. And I suppose when people ask me what kind of book it is, I say, literary fiction, that dreaded word, because while it does have, some elements of mystery, some elements of, suspense, it really is, about the relationships between characters and about how they're making sense of their world.
Sure, yeah. Well, obviously, as you say, it's a love letter to that particular part of London that you were in, so it was a long while in gestation. So why don't you tell me a little bit about how you came to be published? Because I think you published eventually on Unbound, wasn't it? And it came out this February, is that right?
Yes, I was on Unbound's digital list, which was a new project from them. Unbound is a crowdfunding publisher, essentially. They receive pitches and manuscripts, and for projects that they decide to take on, you essentially crowdfund your first run. You get people to kind of pre-order as a form of pledge, and then once you reach your target in those pre-orders, it goes ahead with full production like at any other house. And I'd actually heard of them first through an author named Gautam Malkani, whose book Distortion actually just came out a couple weeks ago on Unbound. I'd read his first book over 10 years ago and enjoyed it. And then when I found out he was crowdfunding his second one, I learned a bit more about Unbound and decided I would pitch my novel to them. And the funniest thing is, when you're a writer, you spend years trying to, write these obsequious addresses to agents, and then even if you get an agent, then you've got to find a publisher, and et cetera, and it goes on for ages. And it's kind of like waiting for a bus. All of a sudden, 2 offers came along at once. I had the book offer from Unbound with the crowdfunding, and then I had an offer from a traditional agent here in New York. And I'd heard such great things about Unbound's editorial team, and I'd looked into them and realized, they were legit and they had good editorial standards. So I went with them, and it was something new and relatively uncharted. And I'm really happy I did it, though, because I was given, I think, a lot more control over some editorial things and over the cover. And over the fact that, I didn't want to do a hardback because it would have meant a higher target. And, I was just thinking I barely ever buy hardbacks myself. I think it's a really good example of adaptation to a market that has been more and more difficult for unknown debut authors like myself to get the slightest sniff of. I think they've really got something good there.
Absolutely, yeah. You're the second guest that we've had on actually that's kind of chosen that route. We had Claire Hanscom came on a few months ago, and she chose the same route and said much the same as you in terms of the fact that she found it was really worked well for her. But did you have obviously the fact that you got offered at the same time a traditional a route to the traditional publishing?
I was,
and so what made you make that decision? Because it, on the face of it, a lot of people would be saying, wow, you managed to turn that down. So what was it in particular?
Well, I was really just thinking a lot about the hard economic realities that are around book publishing right now. And It's not the most exciting thing. I know everybody thinks writing is a really glamorous life, and oh no, it's not. But pretty much I was thinking, the rejections that I'd received on my full manuscript, and there were, I think, 13 of them before I got a yes from an agent. They were all things like, the writing is beautiful, I love your characters, I love your setting, but it's just not for me. I just don't love it enough. That was the thing I was always hearing. It was kind of at the point where I was thinking, tell me there's something wrong with how I write so I can fix it. Rather than just, I'm not going to give a reason. And it really occurred to me, the more I made myself just read about and learn about the industry, that, it's a business. It's like any other business. They have to make a profit. And if you're not going to, have that proven bestseller or have that celebrity memoir that's going to, be an instant bestseller, you're really a financial risk. And you just have to tell yourself it's not personal, it's business. These places have to stay in business. So I was kind of having that hard-nosed reality rubbing up against me at that point, and then also I was seeing people I knew, somebody I knew, sign with this hotshot agent and get his hopes up, and then the agent couldn't sell the book, and he was back to square one. They eventually parted ways, and he was very discouraged and finding out that even if you have an agent, it's no guarantee you're going to get a book contract. And just all these kind of tough realities confronting me and realizing that, the writing's kind of on the wall for whatever reason. It's going to be highly unlikely for you to get what you want if you keep doing the same thing. So why not try something new?
Absolutely. And am I right in thinking that at some point in your past you'd spent some time as an intern at a publishing house as well?
I did, yes. When I was a student in university, I spent a few summers at one of the large houses in New York, and I was on the production side largely, so I did get to look at things like royalties and sales statements and contracts and things like that. And I do remember seeing that for most of the people who weren't the celebrities, your royalties were just so teeny tiny. Understandably, you would have an advance, but I know that if you were to somehow, total up all the hours you spent working and revising and whatnot, and then divide it by your advance, you'd be under minimum wage. That's why. Yes, I kept the day job, and I would suggest most people do too. So I felt like I knew a lot about the publishing agency, and that helped me go in without unreasonable expectations. I think I knew, you're not going to become a bestseller. It's not going to be the kind of thing you quit your day job for, but with the right tactics, you'll get your book read. And that's what mattered to me, getting an audience for this book that I felt, should be read.
Sure, you wanted people to read it. And so you mentioned there, you in passing, you said about the fact that you feel like you should have a day job, and indeed most writers do nowadays, because it's an economic reality, as you say. So by day, you help to shape urban policy for the Department of Transport in New York. But so how does writing fit into your life? Where did writing come into your life?
Well, I've always been this person who is just endlessly fascinated by cities and how they're built and how they work and the lives of the people within them. I'm from New York. I've lived in London. I've spent some time in San Francisco and Boston as well, here in the United States, and in Chicago when I was a kid. So I've always just been really fascinated by the workings of cities, and what I write about is largely cities. It's people who are either newcomers or they're natives. In The Hope and Anchor, it's really the juxtaposition of the two in the form of the two main characters, and how they each view the city around them, and how they see their opportunities and how they see their constraints, kind of all filtered through the landscape of the city. And I feel like both writing and my job in transportation kind of give me that ability to just drill deep down into how cities function and what they mean to people, and how people kind of form their own personal identities within these places where you can be so anonymous, whether you want to be that way or not. And just kind of the idea of transportation forming networks. I always think about that throughout my book when I'm writing, and I'm imagining the main character, Neely, kind of crisscrossing the city on the tube and on the bus and by foot along the canal, all these ways in which she's kind of mentally mapping things out for herself, trying to make sense of her life since her girlfriend disappeared. And I think the two parts of my life really play off each other well. I think it's having this focus on cities and studying urban planning has been tremendously beneficial as a writer.
It's helped you, and obviously having that empathy as well with people.
Yeah, you do. I mean, I have a pretty broad social science background in that regard, and just being able to kind of step into other people's heads is really useful. I mean, I found when my book first came out and it started getting reviews, people were saying, like, I didn't really like it at first. I didn't find the characters likable. And I was like, yes, because I wanted the characters to be these, like, flawed people who you might not want to be friends with and who you might not,
Sure.
want to have a drink with. But things were happening to them and they were doing interesting things. I think it's really important to have those kind of flawed characters, because those are the people who make up your everyday life.
Yeah, that's like realistic. It's how most of us are, and if you can take them on that journey, even if the character's flawed, it kind of says a lot more about the writing in the book.
Exactly, and I've always kind of had something, I guess my little pet peeve against when, like, fiction you can tell is thinly veiled autobiography, just because I feel like that gets in the way of really seeing the flaws in characters. You have to make characters who you can be kind of uncompromising about how, they sabotage themselves. And I think it's really difficult for an individual to say those things about themselves and to be that kind of level of brutally honest. But then when you've got a character who's entirely fictional and you can just kind of, play God in a way and mold them and, understand that, like, this is not what I would do as a person, but she is doing it, and it makes perfect sense for her as a young woman who has, found that her life is not going the way she wants it to. Writing is just wonderfully freeing that way, because you make your own little universe even when you're writing about real places.
I agree, and I think that's especially when people first start out writing, I think they can easily fall into that trap of thinking, I've had it before when I've heard critique of writing, and they say, well, I don't like it when that person did that, and I wouldn't do that.
But it really happens.
Like, yeah, and it's like, well, it doesn't matter whether you would do it. That's not the point. It's whether that character would do it. It's whether that is true to that character.
Exactly.
And even so,
exactly.
and as you say, even so, sometimes people also do things out of character, or seemingly out of character. That unpredictable, or they sabotage themselves, or they make a strange decision, because that's what real people do.
Oh yeah, bad decisions all the way. I mean, like, you have to have that. When your characters are, happy and making sense, then it's no fun.
It's pretty boring, yeah.
For lack of a better word. Yeah.
So when did you kind of get into writing? Was it something you'd done from an early age? What do you love about it?
I've always done it ever since I was a little kid. I remember, just being really bored in primary school and just taking out my notebook and writing a story, and it looks like I'm paying attention and taking notes, but nah. So I think I kind of did it in a way to kind of, stave off boredom in a way, because you can always, come up with something new when you're writing. I was encouraged to read. I think I was really done a tremendous service by having parents who always encouraged me to read, and who always took me to the library, and who, always were like, yeah, you can read 50 things at once if you want. You can take out all the books from the library. You can read at the dinner table. It was that kind of thing. Having that kind of encouragement normalized, that, it's always good to have your face in the book. Really kind of the next logical outcropping was, well, if this person can write a story, then I can do it too. And I really liked, again, a lot of the flawed female characters and, like, the realistic fiction for kids. I remember, because I grew up in America, the Ramona books by Beverly Cleary. I know those are really popular here, even though they began being written in the 50s, about this girl who's, a little bit of a pest. She gets in trouble a lot.
Yeah.
She, drives her older sister nuts, but she's a very real, relatable little girl. I remember loving those books when I was 6, 7 years old, because I think it's really important for children to kind of be able to look at realistic lives and be able to kind of aspire to people who are, quite normal.
Yeah, and as you say, I mean, I think kids as well, especially young kids, they do like to see other kids being a bit naughty or a little bit doing things that they probably shouldn't be doing as well, because I think that's kind of liberating a lot of the time. It's seeing kids do stuff that that you can't do or shouldn't do.
Yeah.
All the best children's fiction, Roald Dahl and J.K. Rowling, whoever it is that's kind of a something that runs through all of it, isn't it?
Oh, I loved Matilda as well. And in that case, it was like adults behaving badly, but it was still, because she was just so brilliant, living in a world of not so brilliant adults, and you cheer for her and you identify with her, and yeah, I think she's probably the greatest fiction character of all time.
Yeah, you've got a good case there. I mean, I did love Roald Dahl as I was growing up, so I was the same. That was kind of my gateway drug really when I first got into reading was Roald Dahl, and sort of almost takes you through to adult fiction as well if you stick with his stuff, with his like autobiography stuff as well, like Boy and things, which are kind of like autobiographies but sort of aimed at kids.
And I think also he's really good at getting younger boys to read as well, because his characters, he has so many really great three-dimensional male characters. Like I remember we read Danny, Champion of the World in school. And I always remember that scene where his dad, the poacher, kind of figures out if he's sedatives and raisins or grapes or something, you can just knock out all the birds and then get all the pheasants you want. And I remember the boys in my school really liked that book. And I know he also did, James and the Giant Peach and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and just, because I know it's still seen as like, reading, it's great for girls, but sometimes it's still a bit more difficult for boys to get into it.
Yeah, I think now more than ever, I think you're right. I think that it is difficult, and there is a bit of a stigma almost attached to it, as younger boys especially being sort of seen to read a book. So you're right. It's any way that we can kind of overcome that, then for the better. Yeah. So was there like a turning point for you? Was there a time? So you mentioned there at some point you must have thought, well, hang on a minute, someone else has written this story. Maybe this is something I can do.
Oh yeah, I always wanted to. I mean, I was that like irritably precocious little kid who's like, oh, I'm gonna have a novel out by the time I'm 18. Like, kind of unrealistic expectations. But I was just always writing, so it seemed like, well, of course I'm not just gonna let it, fester in a notebook and never get seen anywhere. But when I was younger, really up until university, really, I didn't want other people reading my stuff necessarily. I knew that I would have to in order to, get anywhere with it, but there's still always, that fear of rejection and that fear of like, oh my God, if they hate my work, it's because they hate me, or, the other kind of maladaptive thought processes we have for ourselves as writers. And I think rejection is really such an important thing to experience as a writer. Years and years of it. Everyone I talk to, has had far more rejection than they're going to have acceptance. Even though you never really get used to it, like the little twinge of, it never really goes away whenever somebody tells you no, whether it's trying to get a book deal or getting the book stocked or getting the book reviewed. That of course never goes away, but you really become more resilient in kind of just understanding how publishing works and understanding that, we all have different tastes and priorities, and that just because someone doesn't like your work doesn't mean that you're not worthy as an author. It just means that, we don't all like the same things, and that's fine because there's a million books out there.
Exactly. There's plenty to go at. So when did you kind of you said that was kind of a big fear even up until you were a student. So how did you overcome that? What was the point when you could overcome that?
Well, I think it was largely when I went to university and met more people who did write, who really enjoyed writing and also doing other things, because it all meant that we didn't take ourselves too seriously. We always knew that we had, a variety of things going on, and writing was just one part of us, and something that we could, mutually nurture in each other. I would write, fiction with groups of people and for a fiction magazine at my university, and then little by little people were saying that they liked it, and I was like, oh, okay, wow, the sky didn't fall in, it's not all terrible. And from there I just kind of realized, well, maybe I've got something with this. And I think I'm really lucky that I live in New York. I went to university in New York. The publishing industry here is still very substantial, so you get a bit more feedback, you get a bit more, knowledge of the inner workings of the business, and a lot of people who are, working directly in it, who can talk to you and explain things to you. So pretty much after I finished university and I, moved around a lot and got different jobs that had nothing to do with writing or with literature, it was just something I kept doing just because it was what I did. It's part of my identity, really. I'm a writer. Even if I didn't get a book deal, even if I never sold any copies, I would still be the person who writes. And I just, kept going with it.
So how do you fit it around such a busy day job? Because any tips on that would be very welcome.
Oh, I say give yourself permission to take breaks from writing. I know that's going to sound really, awful. Like, how do you write more? Don't write. But I find that, you have to realize that sometimes writers, we ourselves, can be our own worst enemies, and we can cause ourselves to just obsess about our lack of our own productivity, which just sets off a really bad loop of, oh, you're not getting anything right. No one's going to like this. No one's going to read it. And just sometimes the best way to stop that cycle is to just cut it off altogether and come back at another time. Because again, like, when writing is something you don't do for a living, you can step away, and you're lucky in that way. But also you have to be very careful to not burn yourself out, because it's supposed to be fun. I mean, when I came to the realization that, my royalties are never going to let me make rent, it was kind of liberating, because it meant that, if this goes wrong, it's not the end of the world. I can keep this being something fun, something that I want to do, not something that I have to do. Of course, everyone's mileage is going to vary depending on, what you do and how well you sell and things like that. But I think just reminding yourself that, this is supposed to be fun, when it stops being interesting, when it stops being something you want to spend your time on, then, that's telling you something. But I also find that when you do want to do it and you just can't find the time, I find that, without my phone, I'd probably be lost, because it's just so easy now to jot down a few notes, to, say something dictaphone style, or to put down some things in a little app just for later, that, you find yourself pulling time out of unexpected places, like our delayed transit system. Yay! Yeah, I do a lot of writing, sitting on the train, sitting on the subway.
Sure, yeah. Well, it's good you could reclaim that time. So
yeah.
So with The Hope and Anchor, is that the first novel you wrote, or just the first that you got published?
It's the first that I got published. I had a previous novel-length manuscript I was shopping around for a while and working with an agent, but then just kind of what he had essentially told me was, you're a complete unknown, you don't have an MFA. If I'm to sell you as an author, you need to have more than one book ready to go. So I wrote The Hope and Anchor after that, and he didn't really like it, so we parted company from there. But I liked it, and I worked with it. And what was really instrumental in that time is that I moved back to New York after several years away and joined a writing group that was incredibly helpful. People who I didn't know before I went to this group, who were able to give really good feedback, really honest feedback. It was understood, again, this is business, not personal. Just because we don't like something you wrote doesn't mean you're not a good person,
Sure.
All that. And they, really helped me get over what I think were some sticking points. And from there, I was just like, well, I'm not going to quit with this. I'm going to hold on to it. I quit with the previous book because the writing was on the wall, but no, not with this one. This one I love too much.
So the critique group you found really helpful. I know that I'm the same. I'm in a critique.
Tremendously.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be people who aren't your family or your friends.
Yeah.
I mean, I've made great friends from the writing group, but, going into it, we were just all people who had the same goal. We wanted to get commercially published. And to get commercially published, you need that tough love. And we all understood that and accepted that and had thick skins, and that made all the difference.
So how long did it take you from starting the first draft, would you say, to getting accepted by Unbound?
Ooh, well, I started writing the very first bit. It would have been, oh my God, probably 2012 or so. Didn't finish the manuscript till about early 2014, I think. And then, I shopped it around for a while, went back, edited a lot, shopped it around some more edits, and then got accepted by Unbound at the very start of 2017. So yeah, all in all, it was a long process. And I think if precocious, pretentious teenage me had heard, oh, by the way, you're going to be 33 when your book comes out, I would have been like, what? Like, no. And maybe I would have given up, But no, I think time and rejection made it better. Time and rejection definitely made it better. I can write now as somebody with more life experience, and that really, it really does give you a greater depth of writing. And because, you lived.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. You learn, the more you write, the more you learn how to write, don't you?
Exactly.
And so how did it feel when you hit your pledge, your target on Unbound, and you knew that you'd have a date for the release of the book?
It was just fantastic. I mean, I remember, well, it was fantastic in one way, not so much in another, which I'll get to. It was in June of 2017, and that day I went to a concert. I went to see Nick Cave. And when I got out that night, it was one of those New York summer nights where the heat is just like radiating off the pavement, like slapping you in the face. And I remember just checking my Unbound page and seeing the little number 100% funding and just being like, yes, and just wanting to like do my little happy dance out there in the middle of Amsterdam Avenue and make a fool out of myself. But it's okay. You can do it in New York. No one cares. And just thinking like the hardest part is over. It's actually happening now. I mean, the pledges are in, the target's hit. I am definitely going to have a book. Now it just has to be the best book I can possibly make it. But having that pressure off me and just realizing like it's not at the mercy of an agent wanting changes. It's not at the mercy of, well, of course there would be an editor wanting changes, but we work it out, knowing it was guaranteed there would be a book. My book was the best thing. And then unfortunately, then I remember going home and looking at my phone again and having a little news alert pop up telling me about the Grenfell Tower fire. And my book is set. My book is set right in that neighborhood. There's actually one little bit in my book where a character looking back in flashback to around the time she's 18 or 20 ends up living in a building that's, kind of loosely based off Grenfell and the other tower blocks in North Kensington. And I just saw that and I'm like, oh no. Just because, you get to know a place so well, so intimately, and you can never know every life happening within it. But when you know that so many people's lives are being destroyed at once, it was just I was glued to the TV from that point. It's something that I think I last really felt around 9/11 here, when suddenly everyone's talking about something that you found very familiar, but you don't recognize their narratives necessarily.
Right, let's take a quick break there for this week's Book Bloggers Corner. And this week, Emma Rose Hollands is back with her review of The Travelling Cat Chronicles by Hiro Arakawa.
This is the BBC Book Bloggers Corner.
Nana the cat is on a road trip, but he's not sure where he's going. All that matters is that he can sit beside his beloved owner, Satoru, in the front seat of his silver van. Satoru is keen to visit 3 old friends from his youth, though Nana doesn't know why, and Satoru won't say. Set against the backdrop of Japan's changing seasons and narrated with a rare gentleness and humour, Nana's story explores the wonder and thrill of life's unexpected detours. It is about the value of friendship and solitude, and knowing when to give and when to take. There is one word to describe this book: charming. When I first plucked The Travelling Cat Chronicles out of my shelf, I was hoping it would give me what the blurb promised: an easy, laid-back book full of subtle emotion and adorable cats. And man, this book delivered. Nana, our narrator and sassy protagonist, takes centre stage from beginning to end. Not only is his cynical and humorous perspective on the world fitting for a cat, but his character arc will leave you with a quivering lip by the end of the book. Nana starts out as an alley cat, born on the streets, indifferent to others, and through the journey, he learns to love all the beautiful things that life can bring. And chances are, you'll be falling in love right alongside him. You'll love the setting of Japan, from its hectic city streets to its distant countryside. You'll love Satoru, Nana's owner, as you learn the difficulties in his life and how he overcame them. You'll love the side characters, each one so genuine with their motivations and thoughts that you'll swear you've met some of them in real life. But above all, you'll love the final message of the book as you turn the final page. You'll learn that life, even at its hardest, is something you can never take for granted. At least, that's how I felt reading it. If you're looking for a well-paced, heartfelt novel to snuggle down with, or if you just love anything about cats, I really recommend giving this book a chance. It left me with a sense of ease and a warmer heart than when I started. A positively perfect read.
Book Bloggers Corner.
That's The Travelling Cat Chronicles by Hiro Arakawa, reviewed by Emma Rose Hollands. And you can find more of Emma's reviews and blogs at whywordswork.wordpress.com, and you can follow her on Twitter at ERHollands. Right, let's get back to my chat with Julia, where I asked her how she feels looking back on the whole process. So, having gone through the experience, obviously you're a few months on now from the actual release. How are things going now? Are you still enjoying it? Have you kind of got used to the idea that you're a published author now?
Yeah, I mean, I really am liking it. And I like the idea that, apparently I was selling really well in Australia for a while, where I just came back from my honeymoon.
Yeah, congratulations.
And just the idea that, thank you. Just the idea that people 10,000 miles away are picking up this book about another place that's a different 10,000 miles away, and, and figuring it out and actually enjoying it, finding these reviews from people I've never met. It's very humbling because people have given you their time, and that's so precious. I mean, even a bad review, I think, is a gift in a way, because it reminds you that somebody, cared enough to take the time to read your book, to pick it up instead of another book. If they hated it, I'm sorry, but at least it got read, and that's how I stay sane, really.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a subjective thing, anyway. As we said earlier, they'll either like it or they won't. It's just how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of famous books that I haven't liked that other people love, and that's the beauty of having a million choices of what to read.
Yeah, and you can always go on to Amazon, look at like Great Expectations, and see how many 1-star reviews there are. There's quite a lot.
Oh yeah. My new favorite thing, kind of, when I started getting reviews, is to go on Goodreads and look at the classics and kind of see like people who missed the point completely, or like 1-star review to
Exactly.
Philip Roth, who had just died, and 1-star review to this. Like, this guy complains too much. It's very therapeutic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the best way to look at it. So having been through the experience, would you do anything differently if you had the chance to do it again?
Probably some aspects of the marketing I would have started on earlier, in terms of how much you need to engage in social media. And I mean, I think I was at a bit of a disadvantage because, living in America, publishing with the UK house, you don't really have as many opportunities for the in-person part of things. Mm-hmm. But nowadays, with people who are on Unbound's digital list, it's like 95% of our sales are ebooks, and you can do that from anywhere. Mm-hmm. So I think that perhaps I would have started kind of maybe releasing excerpts early. Have to check my contract on that. Don't quote me. Or just getting to know reviewers better. I think that might have served me better. But otherwise, I think chips largely fell where they may.
Yeah, it's probably just hit the ground running a bit earlier, but that's something that you wouldn't really know until you'd been through it.
Yeah, and I mean, I did hire a publicist, which was something I paid for out of my own pocket, and mm-hmm. I didn't really see a whole lot out of that, to be honest. Mm-hmm. But I know people listening to this podcast, your mileage may vary. I wrote, a heavy literary fiction book, book that can be a bit of a downer, and that's harder to sell than some kinds of nonfiction or, some kinds of more, upbeat fiction. So really, someone's experience could be entirely different. I'm glad I did it, just to know, because now I can't kick myself and think, I should have had a bigger publicity push. Well, no, I tried and it just didn't happen.
Yeah, and that is a difficult thing to. I mean, it's especially nowadays with like social media experts and the like, and it is difficult to know, what you're buying and whether you're going to get good value for money with that, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Did you go by recommendation for the publicist?
No, I really just did the research myself, and then went with really who seemed to be offering a good value for money. Mm-hmm. A lot of people, their schedules get full so far ahead of time, and I didn't really have my release date set in stone mm-hmm. until about a month and a half in advance. Mm-hmm. And that kind of the hurry up and wait bit can be a bit difficult because you want to plan, it's your baby, you want to make sure it goes really great, but then sometimes it just conspires against you. Authors who have massive publicity budgets conspire against you. Yeah, sure. Not really. They're not intending to. It's
they're not
just,
intending to, but it's how it falls.
They have more resources.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand. So, what would you say in terms of writing advice? What would you say the best piece of writing advice you've ever heard, and what would you say is the worst? Okay.
Let's see. The best is probably give yourself permission to not be very good. It's better to write something and have it be total crap than to, not write it at all, because at least you can learn from something that doesn't go very well. That's definitely, give yourself permission to fail, to do absolutely horribly, to write, dreck. And keep it and look back and laugh at it later. But just write it. That's the crucial thing, that you're actually getting it down on paper, or computer, or whatever. The worst advice is probably to stay in my own lane. And by that I mean to try not to write outside your own experience, which I know is kind of a controversial topic right now. But the way I see it, the great thing about fiction and the great thing about writing is that it really allows you to look at the commonalities throughout all of human experience. And you're not going to capture any perfect existence other than that of your character yourself. But when you start imposing limits on yourself of, this topic is off limits, this person's bit of identity is off limits, this is not for me, well then, why are you writing fiction in the first place, I think.
I agree. And the other thing with that is as well, I actually think about it the other way, because I think it does us all good. I think if more people tried on the clothes, if you like, of other people's existences, and if they at least tried to get in the same kind of headspace, even if it's not exactly accurate or it's not exactly right, I think just trying to do that feat of empathy can be a really positive thing.
Yeah, and let the readers decide whether you got it right or not, I think, rather than say that, oh, this is definitely wrong for me to do, rather, do it and then let other people know, did you get it right? Did it ring true? Does it sound contrived? But overall, don't force boundaries on yourself when the rest of the world is more than eager to try to do that to you,
Absolutely. Okay, well, as we kind of move towards wrapping things up, you'd mentioned briefly, you said you've started on the next book. How far along are you with that?
I'm not very far, actually, because kind of, the book came out February. I was doing a lot of marketing and publicity for it for a long time, and then kind of moved into wedding planning mode up until August. So the times I had were kind of pulled from wherever I could get them. I'm very early on in it, just kind of writing dribs and drabs here, getting, a good image, trying to commit it to memory. But I think, now in the next few months, now that things are kind of calming down again, I'll be, kind of pushing myself a bit further, yeah.
And is it a follow-on or is it another standalone?
In a way, it's a follow-on. Yeah, it is. It kind of, what I was hearing from people who read The Hope and Anchor was that they really liked this one character named Andrea, who's the sister of the woman who goes missing. And I did have to cut quite a bit of hers in order to eliminate, too many point of view shifts and too much going on when I, had the final copy of The Hope and Anchor. But then I realized, she was touching a note with some people, and I kind of want to revisit her 10 or something years in the future when she's moved on with her life, she's out in the suburbs, her kids are growing up, and then the Grenfell Tower fire kind of brings her back to having to confront her past trauma with her sister missing, and the time when that place was her trauma and now it's everybody's trauma. And I'm still kind of figuring out how to do it properly, but I'm going to let myself kind of play in the sandbox for a while. And now that I know how slowly publishing moves, I think there's nothing wrong with wanting to go slow.
Absolutely, yeah. And you've got plenty on your plate anyway, so
yeah.
So well, that's great. Well, so where can people find a little bit more about you and your work online?
Great. Well, I would go to my website is juliakite.com, JuliaKite. Yes, that's my real last name, like the flying thing. Juliakite.com. I use Twitter a lot, probably too much, but it's good for writing, is like making yourself be really concise, or at least that's what I tell myself.
That's what I tell myself as well,
yeah. So I'm at Julia Kite. And also you can find me on Facebook if you just type in Julia Kite author or Julia Kite writer. It's one of those two, can't remember. You'll come to my author page on Facebook. And The Hope and Anchor can be found an ebook on any of the online platforms. You can also find it. I know that it's carried by Waterstones in London, as well as some really great independents. Shout out to, I'm going to miss some, Camden Lock Books, Owl Books, Inc. 84 up in North London, Lichens and Rubenstein, Notting Hill Books, and of course the Big Green Bookshop, who are lovely.
Excellent. That's nice to get some shout outs for some independent shops as well. Oh, well, it's been great to talk to you, Julia. Best of luck with the continued sales of the book and obviously the writing of the second one, the follow-up. And I hope we get a chance to chat again in the future.
Thank you so much, Wayne, and thanks for doing this podcast.
Okay, thanks again to Julia, and you can buy The Hope and Anchor right now in all the usual places. I'll put Julia's links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. That wraps things up for another week, but don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website. Make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever else you get your podcasts to have the show downloaded automatically every week. Also, remember to take a few moments to leave me an iTunes rating and review, just like listener Jim Snell recently did. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Jim. And it's one of the easiest things you can do to help other people to find the show. Next time, I'll be talking to editor Liam J. Cross, who gives loads of amazing insight into the editing process. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing and reading, and I'll see you next time.
Joined up.